University of Michigan got it right, right? She connects this idea of you believing that your choices impact your future. She says this is connected to your happiness. Now, if you've ever taken a psychology course, whether in high school or a Psych 101 in college, you probably have learned about a study done back in the 1960s by a researcher by the name of Martin Seligman. And he did some research on beagles, if I remember correctly, but they were dogs, and they strapped them down temporarily. They strapped one group, they divided them into 3 groups. The first group, they strapped them down and didn't do anything else to them. Second group, they strapped them down and then they shocked them. But they put by their snout a little lever that they could depress, and they could, when they were being shocked, they could push down that lever and it would stop the shock. The third group, they would shock them and there was nothing they could do about it. Now today this would be considered unethical, but people didn't have ethics back in the 1960s. So, I'm just kidding. I'm just sorry. So, yeah, nobody told them back then that wasn't nice to torture animals. You know, we found that out later on, obviously. But nevertheless, that is unethical. I don't think that's a nice thing. But we did find out something fascinating about that, and that is that then afterward, they took them out of the harness, they put them into a cage with 2 sides to the cage, and they put them in one at a time, and there was a little fence between them, but the fence was tiny. I mean, the dog could easily just almost walk over, but easily jump over to the other side. I mean, it was like this, you know? And so they'd put the dog in the side, then they'd turn on the floor, which was electrified, and they'd begin to shock the dogs. Well, the ones who had been the ones who had been strapped down and nothing happened to them, immediately when the floor was electrified, they just jumped to the other side. The other side was not electrified, so it stopped the pain. The second group that had been shocked but could push down and stop the electrification, they too, when the floor was shocking them, they just jumped to the other side and get away from the pain. The third group, on the other hand, that had been shocked but couldn't do anything about it, when they turned on the electrified floor, they stood there and they froze, and it just kept shocking them, and they gave up, and they just would lie down and just suffer. Sad, isn't it? And so the researchers came up with a term for this that they call learned helplessness. Learned helplessness. And even the term just makes sense, right? You've learned that you are helpless, you can't do anything. Why even try? Your decisions, your willpower, do absolutely nothing. There's nothing you can do, right? That's a terrible thought. It's a destructive thought. But you may have had that. Maybe you grew up and you were abused and you had a very, very broken home, and you tried and nothing ever worked, and so then finally you gave up and you thought, there is nothing I can do, I'm helpless. But I'm here to tell you now, especially as you're an adult, you are not helpless today, even if you were before. That you can decide your future and even your destiny. Now, God has foreordained that you should be saved. Now, He doesn't force you to be saved, but it's His will that you would be saved. Yes or no? God is not willing that any should what? Perish, but that all should come to repentance. But that doesn't mean everybody repents. But it means that God is willing for you to repent, and He wants to save you more than anything else. He would rather die than have you be lost. And that's why Jesus died for us on the cross, right? And once again, we already stated it over and over and over, but you can't repeat these quotes too much. But, you know, as the Bible says, with men it is impossible, but not with God, for with God all things are possible. So even if there are things in your life you can't do on your own, with God's help you can, because I can do all things through Christ, which strengthens me, right? And so believing that God can give you the victory can actually change you. You are not helpless, but they did research to see, could you return people to autonomy, to getting to the point where they don't feel helpless anymore? A researcher from Yale conducted a study on depressed elderly people who are living in a nursing home, which often in a nursing home, you just kind of give up. I'm at the end of my life. There's nothing I can do. I'm depressed. I feel bad. And they asked them, in the nursing home, they asked the people in there to make choices on what food they ate, if they wanted to change the channel on television, to have the furniture rearranged, or if they wanted to change the air conditioning. They also had them request to change policies in the nursing home, and then these were granted. And 93% of those who were given choices to make changes became happier and more active in their lives. So meaning, if you have options in life and you choose to make positive decisions based upon information that you have, it makes you a happier person. Does that make sense? Now, you do have autonomy. Ellen White tells us, right? You are the arbiter of your own destiny, she says. Your happiness for this life and for the future immortal life lies with yourself. You get to choose. You get to choose the decisions that you make in life. And so tonight, I'm going to give you a bunch of decisions that you get to make. I'm not going to ask you to, tell me you're going to make them, but you can find in the things we're going to look at something that could positively impact your life. What you could do is you could choose to continue to have learned helplessness if you have that. And you could see all these positive things you could do to change and just say, why even try? I'm just going to give up. I've met people like that. I went through I thought back on it, probably at least 11 years of depression. For years I said 10, but then I looked back and thought, maybe I missed a year. Probably 11 years of depression. I tried all different kinds of things to overcome, and nothing worked. Until I tried something that did work. But the point is, I tried a bunch of things that didn't work. What if I would have tried 15 things and then said, I've tried 15 things, none of them work, I'm not going to try anything else? And what if I was one habit, one change away from the answer, but I gave up just before I got to the finish line? And that's why I would challenge you, even if you tried 100 things, it might be the 101st one that's going to change your life. Don't give up just because what you've tried has not worked. And always remember, as the Bible says in Matthew 28, verse 18, anybody know what we call this passage? The Great Commission, right? And Jesus came and spake unto them, saying, all power is given unto me in what? Heaven and earth. And he goes on to say, go ye therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost, teaching them to observe all things that I have commanded. For lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the age. And so that's what it talks about. But the first part says, all power is given unto me in heaven and earth. And we already know, we already quoted Philippians 13, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So I can do all things, not by myself, because I don't have strength in and of myself, but if I'm connected to the one who we just read has how much power? All power. So I can make decisions, and I don't mean I, but God has given each of us the ability to make decisions that can impact our lives. Listen to this amazing quote from the book Education, page 17. Every human being created in the image of God is endowed with a power akin to that of the Creator. Individuality. Power to think and to do. The men in whom this power is developed are the men who bear responsibilities, who are leaders in enterprise, and who influence character. It is the work of true education to develop this power, to train the youth to be thinkers and not mere reflectors of other men's thoughts. I probably shouldn't say it, but I fear our educational system and some of our larger institutions are getting to be creating reflectors of other men's thoughts. Whatever the news says, they promulgate the same ideas. Whatever the news says, that's what's the truth. And you know what? We're just creating parrots. We're creating reflectors of other men's thoughts. But true education was not meant to do that. It was to make people who could think and make decisions. And notice that it was to make leaders in enterprise. We have got into the habit of the same thing as the secular education system in America, which teaches to be ladder climbers, not to just be actually leaders in enterprise. We don't actually teach people to be leaders in enterprise very much anymore. Even now, the medical system, very few people go into private practice. I'm not putting anybody down for that, but what I'm saying is because it's gotten so hard to be a leader, to actually be, that we just don't even do it. Just get in the cog of the system, and the trouble is that could, all of a sudden, you could be told one day that you are non-essential, and you just lose your job. because we didn't listen to what we were told about true education, that it was to make leaders in enterprise. We've gotten away from that. We used to be into that. We used to have schools like the Madison School, where even the president's wife, Eleanor Roosevelt, she actually wrote an article about the Madison School. I've read the article myself. And she said that they had done, after the Great Depression, they did a survey, and they found, they looked at, like, I don't know, 2,000 former students of the Madison School, and they found that during the Great Depression, not one of them had to be standing in a bread line waiting for food. Not one. Because they were doing true education and not making just reflectors of other men's thoughts. They were making people who were diligent, industrious, could work with their hands if they need to. If they lost a job, they could create a job because they had learned true education. I'm not putting anybody down. We've lost that, largely. We've lost that because we're not for, especially like handiwork and these kind of things. And the fact is, as all things break down, some of those more practical jobs will still exist when a lot of the impractical jobs dissipate and just disappear. This isn't what I actually came here to talk about, but something to consider. And it goes on to say, it says, instead of confining their study to that which men have said or written, let students be directed to the sources of truth, to the vast fields open for research in nature and revelation. We need to get back to the Bible and true science. Let them contemplate the great facts of duty and destiny, and the mind will expand and strengthen, instead of educated weaklings. Institutions of learning may send forth men strong to think and to act, men who are masters and not slaves of circumstances, men who possess breadth of mind, clearness of thought, and the courage of their convictions. That is like quotation. That is like blow your mind, like, like the apex of a movie kind of quotation. It's just like, wow. Imagine educational institutions that did that. Who wouldn't want to send their kids to that school, right? Our schools wouldn't be folding if that was what we were teaching in our educational system, right? But right now, kind of changing thought, Americans are besieged by stress, a poll finds. They're actually saying that nearly 80% of Americans are struggling with anxiety today. Not in this quote. This was earlier on in the pandemic. That one, I don't know, might have been, no, this was the article. Yeah, over 80% of Americans say that they're claiming they are struggling with anxiety right now, probably higher than any point in her history that we know of. And yet we're not living in the most stressful times, actually. There's not like a war taking place. We're not being bombed in America. Sure, we may be kind of doing a proxy war over in Ukraine, but we're not living in the midst of some serious thing compared to, other times in Earth's history. We're super wealthy, we have tons of food, we have everything we need, and even if you don't have money, there's still a safety net. Like, we just live in, but yet something is happening inside. And so how can we maybe get to the point where we're not so stressed? And that's what I want to kind of talk about. But I want to talk about, to begin with, anti-anxiety meds. Well, you could just take a medication. That's an option, right? But let's look at the research. Researchers have discovered that anti-anxiety medications can increase the likelihood of cognitive decline later in life by causing damage to neurons in the brain. So I'm not telling you can't take them, but what I am telling you, if you do, you're going to be more likely to have, what's another word for cognitive decline? Something like dementia, where you're losing your mind as you get older, right? And what about, you could just, how about depression medication? Well, people who use and I'm not putting anybody down for using these, I'm just simply telling you what the research shows. People who use antidepressant medications are more likely to relapse into depression than those who never went on the medication. Even if they were depressed, but they never took the meds, they're less likely to get it again. But people who take placebos may be less likely to have future depression. This is the actual study of what they found. On the very left side here, this is, of those who were given a placebo during the scientific study, this is the chance of their relapsing into depression. But notice virtually every other kind of medication like SSRIs, SNRIs, and all of these different forms of medication were at least generally twice to 3 times to almost maybe 5 times more likely, or 4 times more likely at least, to relapse into depression if they had taken some kind of depression medication. But if you just gave them a placebo, they were less likely to go through depression again. This is quite fascinating. Now, I'm not telling you what to do with this information, but one of the things is I'm convinced that we might give a little, paper that gives you the side effects and the medication. Nobody really reads that. So I'm here to give you I'm here to read it to you, basically. Give you what the actual research says. So I'm not telling you whether to do it or not. That's none of my business. Everybody gets to make their own decisions in life. But I do want you to at least know what happens. So are there some natural things we can do for stress, anxiety? We're going to look at the research, not just my suggestions. Let's start off with lemon balm and stress. Well, we'll look a little. Anybody ever smell, like rub your hand in lemon balm and smell that? Anybody ever do that before? How does that smell? Oh, it's amazing, isn't it? To me, that's one of my favorite smells on planet Earth, is the smell of fresh lemon balm. Well, let's look at the research. Research had already shown that lemon balm, or what's called Melissa officinalis, has a calming and mild sedative effect, but no study had yet been conducted to actually cause stress to patients to see how lemon balm could help alleviate the stress. So researchers in a placebo-controlled double-blind crossover study, let me explain crossover studies. The cool thing, let's say we're all in a study right here, and you're in 2 groups. Now, you wouldn't know what group you're in, but this is the way it worked in the study. So this side begins on placebo, and they wouldn't tell you, hey, by the way, there's nothing in this pill. But this side goes on placebo. They don't know it. This side doesn't go on placebo. They actually get the lemon balm, and then they put them in a stressful situation. They take this lemon balm, and they see, well, how does it go for this side? How does it go for that side? And then a crossover trial, what it does later is it switches. So now this side gets the lemon balm, and this side gets the placebo, because sometimes you don't know, like, well, maybe it would have worked for those guys, and maybe it randomly actually just worked for these people, and it wouldn't work for those people. So you try it both ways, but both of them got the placebo at different times, and both of them got the real herb in this situation. And what ended up happening? So researchers, they tried 2 different doses of lemon balm extract, which was 300 milligrams or 600 milligrams, against a placebo in a lab-induced stress on the participants. And while taking the 600 milligrams of lemon balm, they had an increase in calmness during the stressor, but the trouble is they also had less alertness. And so you probably don't want to be less alert. You're not like, man, I just wish I was kind of spacey, right? No, you don't want that. So what did they find? While taking the 300 milligrams of lemon balm, they enhanced their speed in mathematical processing without lowering their accuracy. So it also lowered their stress level, but it didn't make them like spacey. So the reason I brought this study up first is this. Are there natural remedies that can be helpful to things like anxiety? The answer is yes, number 1. But some of you are probably like me naturally, and that my wife says I'm the kind of person that thinks if 1 is good, 10 is better, right? And is that true, that if 1 is good, more is always better? This study shows that now taking the 300 milligrams of this has a benefit to your stress levels, but it actually can help maybe even make your mathematical processing even better. So you're not like spacey as a result of it. The point is, we should be moderate even in our use of things like natural remedies. You follow? They may be shown scientifically to work, but just because one works, don't do it all the time. Or all kinds of it. You could probably regularly have some, lemon balm, have a tea here and there every day or whatever if you want to. I'm not saying you have to, but my point is that you don't want to be having probably 3 glasses of the thing, or you want to have a simple dosage of it and not overdo it, because overdoing a good thing in and of itself is a bad thing, right? You're being intemperate by overdoing a good thing. And so let's go on to another. This next one probably most of you already know. This is not new to most people. But this plant is St. John's wort, and it grows all over Michigan. This is something grows here, even up in the UP. You go up to the Upper Peninsula. You go in the summer and you'll see those beautiful yellow flowers. I tried to grow some in my yard. None of them came up. And then I walked to the front of the property, and it's growing everywhere. I didn't know. And it's not because I planted it. I know it didn't blow I mean, it's a quarter mile. It wouldn't have blown all the way up there through the forest. But nevertheless, it just grows wild all over. And looking at this, a study of 105 people put on either placebo or 300 milligrams of St. John's wort 3 times a day. 67% of those taking St. John's wort lowered their levels of depression versus 28% of the placebo group. And by the way, just in case you're wondering, that word wart, it doesn't mean a skin disorder. The word that's W-A-R-T. W-O-R-T is an Old English term for plant. It means simply St. John's plant. And so that's one study. 29 different studies with over 5,000 patients have been conducted looking at the effectiveness of St. John's wort. And what did they find? St. John's wort has been compared to placebo and different medications, including selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, also known as SSRIs, or tri- or tetracyclic antidepressants. And it turns out that St. John's wort is as effective as the standard depression medication in research trials. Now, here's the thing. I'm going to be very open. I wish I didn't have to say this, but it is sadly true. The Attorney General of the state of New York did an investigation into the 4 top providers of supplements in the state of New York, and they were basically companies like Walmart, maybe GNC, or like, I don't remember exactly what one, so I won't say for sure, but I just said 2. But at least Walmart was one of them. And what they found was that when actually tested, 80% of supplements have 0% of what they say they have in them. 0%. And you say, well, don't they like ever get tested? And they do actually. They've been tested, and they're fined when you find out that what they suggest is in the pill is not in the pill. But you know what? The fine is so low, they don't care. They'll just pay the fine and then just go immediately to putting nothing back in that pill, or making it, basically it's a placebo. So sometimes people who genuinely need it, they take it and it doesn't do any good. And that is, number one, it should be a crime. It should be they should punish them, in my estimation, so hard that they never want to do it again. Right? Because if the fine for speeding was 50 cents, I would speed all the time, right? Like, if that was the whole, like, oh, 50 cents, yeah, keep the change, man, here's 75 for you, you wouldn't care. But when it gets to be really expensive, you're like, oh man, that's bad. And then if I do it too many times, I'll just take my license away. People, there has to be these companies are making millions and millions of dollars giving nothing. And so the point is, how do you know? And so generally, I'm the kind of person where one of the things you can do is you can actually get the herb itself. You can go cut it off for yourself. You can make a tea out of it. You can do these kind of things. And that way you actually know what you're getting. And, I'm not advertising for him, but Andy sometimes has good herbs growing around, and you can talk to Andy. I don't know. But like my point is, there's different things you can do where you can find ways of getting it so you're getting the actual herb. Or sometimes you can buy the dried herbs themselves, and you can actually look at it and tell, like, oh yeah, that is the actual herb, by comparing it to pictures somewhere else. And so sometimes, and by the way, my thought is we should learn, and we're told this, we should learn as much as we can to find the natural remedies. We can grow them on our own properties so that we can help our families. We actually have our own medicine cabinet growing in the yard. And you can save it and turn. All you have to do is cut these things off of the ground, hang them upside down, just tie them with a little piece of twine, hang them like Andy. I was over at Andy's house after lunch today, and it's hanging right there in the kitchen. Various different herbs that they picked there, and we have them hanging in my basement. And you can do it anywhere. The point is, you can figure out how to do it, making sure you have legitimate herbs. So it goes on to say St. John's wort has fewer side effects than the medications, according to the research. And the Journal of Clinical Psychopharmacology reported on St. John's wort versus Prozac in a double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled study. And St. John's wort was significantly more effective than both Prozac and placebo. So it's better than the drug medication. The trouble is, obviously, pharmaceutical companies can't make very much money off an herb, right? And then the people who can make off, they might be putting nothing in the bottle anyway, So it's kind of a bummer. It's a difficult situation. And once you take the drug, you're more likely to become depressed in the future. You realize how crazy that is? Like, then you're more likely to need the drug again. You get the point. This is nuts. Like, It's kind of like we need to shake our minds up and not just go along with everything the world does and learn. I'm not saying not to take it. I'm not telling you that at all. But like maybe there's a better way. And the answer is there is, I believe. Maybe there's a better way. So now those are a couple of natural remedies in the herbal kingdom. But I want to share with you some of them that you already know, and some of them are so simple that you probably already know about. Like here's research on, now it's correlation. Correlation's not always causation, but check this out. Individuals were surveyed and asked how many glasses of water they drank on a daily basis. It turned out that those who drank a minimum of 6 glasses of water per day were over 3 times more likely to be very happy compared to those who drank less than 1 glass of water per day. 6 glasses of water, normally people say what, like, I don't know, 8 glasses a day or something like that. Some people say more or whatever. But the point is, just looking at people who actually do it, at least drink 6 glasses or more a day, they're 3 times more likely to report being very happy than those who drink, what was it, less than 1 glass per day. And you may say, great, I drink like 8 sodas every day. Well, I don't do that, obviously, but let's look at the research on that. What did they find? But I drink soda. Higher consumption of soda is associated with higher rates of depression. So it's not simply getting liquid in your body. Does that make sense? It's what is the liquid you're putting in your body, and is there anything better than water to drink? No. Water is God's beverage, right? He created it. If he meant for us to drink soda, he could have made the ocean made of soda, right? But he didn't do that. He didn't do that. Now, you probably know, so something as simple as drinking water, adequate amounts of water. So very simple. But now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about a number of things. I'm not saying you need to take St. John's wort or even lemon balm or whatever, but giving you a bunch of options. And remember, you are the arbiter of your own destiny. You get to decide. If you see, we're going to look at probably 10 things tonight, and if you pick 3 of them that you're not doing and choose to implement them, I'm not saying if you're not depressed, you don't need to take St. John's wort. I'm not suggesting that at all. But what I am saying is some of these things, if you're not doing them, some of these normal habits, by implementing them, might make you simply a little bit happier. Even if you're not depressed, and if you are depressed, some of them, and doing enough of them together, may actually bring you out of depression in the majority of cases. Now, obviously, this time of year, many people are struggling with SAD, seasonal affective disorder. Roughly 6% of Americans struggle with this, but more people in the north. And you can imagine Michigan, people are just happy as a lark this time of year, aren't they? No, but this is the time of year where people are more prone to struggle, and the further north you are, the harder it gets. And especially with Michigan, with the, we get so much darkness this time of year. And so doing the best we can, and light therapy, we were just talking about this actually at lunch, those light boxes, while you're having your devotions or whatever, you can just sit there with these little light boxes, and you may notice, even if it doesn't help your depression, it may actually give you more energy. Some people call them energy boxes. And so, they're not very expensive either. You can get them on Amazon, but they have to have 10,000 lux, L-U-X. And that's the level of brightness. You don't look at it just like you don't look at the sun. You just put it off to the side. And if you can get out in the sun, I have found just getting outside, but not everybody can because they work all day, but just getting outside can make a massive, spending half an hour, 45 minutes outside every day, even in the winter, even in the darkest time of the year, can make a significant benefit because it's always brighter outside, even when it's darker out. Like you think, oh no, these lights are bright. I mean, as the sun's going down, yes, it's brighter in here, but during the midday, it's so much brighter outside, and it's so very good for your mind. But the Bible said, it told us in Ecclesiastes chapter 11, verse 7, truly the light is sweet, and a pleasant thing it is for the eyes to behold the sun. The Bible told us that it's pleasant for the eyes to behold the sun. And it is, isn't it? Especially when summer starts coming back and you're like, oh, the glorious sun. Or you go weeks without sun in Michigan, and one day the sun is out and you're like, oh, man, you almost get chills just thinking about it, right? And so, yes, God told us the light is truly sweet, and it's pleasant for your eyes to behold the sun. A little off the subject, but how many miles, do you know how many miles you have to walk on average to lose a pound? Anybody got a guess? Someone said 6. Any other guesses? 35 miles. Did you say it? Oh, 35 miles. So if you want to lose a pound, no problem. Just walk 35 miles, right? Well, the trouble is that takes a lot of time. Really, exercise is very beneficial for the body. I would say that exercise is more beneficial for your brain than it is for weight loss. It's not the best thing for weight loss. Dietary change is the best thing for weight loss. Now, exercise is good. I'm not negating that. But I want to talk a bit about depression and ask the question, is it possible to run away from depression? Now, it's a little play on words there. But let's look at this. Exercise versus medication. A meta-analysis was conducted looking at 25 different studies on the impact of exercise compared to antidepressant pharmaceuticals. What did they find? They found that exercise is evidently just as effective as the medication when it comes to depression in non-severe depression, so mild to moderate depression they found. You say, okay, but then what about the more severe case? Okay, so exercise is just as good as drug medication for people to have mild to moderate, but what about more severe cases? Well, they've done research on that. This was just in particularly. So here's exercise on severe major depression. A small study in the British Journal of Sports Medicine looked at aerobic exercise in moderate to severe major depression, and the participants would exercise daily by interval training. Maybe you've heard of IT exercise. And they would run for 3 minutes, then walk for 3 minutes, and for a total of 30 minutes. So you run for 3, and then you walk for 3. Then you run for 3, and then you walk for 3. So you're really pushing it for 3 minutes at a time, and then you're kind of having and then you take off again 3 minutes, and then you're not so bad for 3, and you do that for 30 minutes. And there was a statistically significant reduction in depression in those exercising this form of intermittent training. And so it turns out they conclude the study by saying that this form of interval exercise training can also have a substantial improvement in depression levels in people with major depression. So exercise is very, very, very important. And you may be so depressed that you say, I don't feel like doing it. But you know what? You are the arbiter of your own destiny. God can help you to do it even though you don't feel like doing it. And I'm going to be very honest with you. I would take it easy to begin with, because if you overdo, I'm not telling you to just start running as fast as you can for 3 minutes. You want to work your way into it. Make sure, if you're not in good health, talk to your doctor. Make sure you're, well enough to do it. You may have to slowly work your way up to something like that. Even if you don't feel like doing it, do it anyway, because you'll start feeling better. At first, you might feel worse because you're so not used to exercising. Your muscles will ache and you'll feel real bad. But what happens is, after multiple times of doing it, your muscles won't hurt anymore. Your body gets used to it. You get used to it. And so it won't hurt forever. It just hurts to begin. So exercise is very important. So the question is, can you run away from depression? In some cases, you can, right? Just as good as drug medication, you can at least. So we see the same thing for something as simple as we see water, very good. Exercise, very good. We see things like St. John's wort, more effective than drug medication. Very interesting. And so we look at this. Well, we didn't talk on negative ions, but what about sugar and depression? It has been discovered that people who ate more sugar were more depressed. But the question remained, was it the depression that caused people to eat more sugar, or was it the additional sugar that was a causative factor in depression? Well, this study gives maybe an idea that a study out of the University College London looking at more than 8,000 students, followed them from the 1980s, discovered that men who ate the most sugar had a 23% higher likelihood of becoming depressed within the next 5 years. So evidently, that high quantities of sugar can increase your chances of being depressed. So you might be thinking, man, I better give up the fruit then, right? No. We're going to get back to that. That's not the case. This is interesting. I don't understand how it works, because trans fats were actually banned a few years ago. It might have been like, I forget what year it was, but a few years ago. But they still are in certain foods. Things like margarine, Crisco are a form of fat have a form of fat called trans fat. But margarine might have changed now. Now they might be using more like coconut oil, or I don't know what they're using. I shouldn't even say what margarine uses today. But research in the Adventist Health Study 2 revealed that consumption of trans fats were correlated with higher levels of unhappy feelings, more trans fats, more depression. But I've been looking at things and still seeing trans fats in some foods. So even though supposedly it was supposed, maybe it's smaller companies are allowed to do it, I'm not sure. But by and large, they were supposed to get rid of them. But if you find something that says like if you find peanut butter that says it has hydrogenated oil in it, don't buy it. That is a trans fat. And that's going to make your kids less happy and you less happy. So trans fats are one of the worst forms of fat. And by the way, you can choose to do whatever you want, but I know people typically today think of coconut oil as a health food. But the research is actually quite clear on coconut oil that it raises your cholesterol higher than beef tallow. Head-to-head to beef fat, coconut oil actually raises your cholesterol higher than beef fat. And so even the American Heart Association has come out and said you can use coconut oil in your hair and on your skin, but don't take it internally. So now, that doesn't mean you can't eat some coconut here and there. Coconut in the whole form is the way God designed it. But when we're extracting it this way, it is something that may be significantly increasing levels of cholesterol and potentially even heart disease. So no judgment, just letting you know, side note there. Speaking, I don't know, I stuck this, I should have put this verse, the last one, about the sugar. Proverbs 25, verse 27, it says, it is not good to eat what? Much honey. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't eat honey. Honey is actually beneficial for you. But it says not to eat a ton of it, right? And so it's, once again, I mean, there's research, I could show you actual research on the benefits of honey, both externally and internally, but you just don't want to overdo it, and we know that. And any baby 1 year generally shouldn't be eating it under the age of 1, they suggest, because you could end up getting botulism. That's for the baby anyway. But if God knew this, why didn't he tell us about the sugar? Well, he did. Sugar is not good for the stomach. It causes fermentation, and this clouds the brain and brings peevishness into the disposition. What is peevishness? It's easily irritated, especially by unimportant things. So eating a bunch of sugar is not really, it's obviously not a health food. Now, we're going to jump forward here. I've shared this with you in some other things, but just as a review for those of you, you probably heard me share this before. I love this study. This is a study out of the American Journal of Public Health, and this is life satisfaction, roughly how happy you are, and this is how many servings of fruits or vegetables you eat in a day. If you eat 0, you're at the lowest level statistically of happiness. If you eat 1, tiny little difference. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 servings of fruits or vegetables it makes a difference in how happy you are. But this is the fascinating thing, because they did 2 different studies on this. One was done in the British Journal of Health Psychology. This one was in the American Journal of Public Health. And what they discovered was that not only did it tell you how happy you would be the day of eating all this fruits and veggies, it would forecast how happy you would be the next day. Isn't that cool? So if you want to be happy, you need to eat more fruits and veggies today, right? Now, that doesn't mean go home and try to eat 8 servings of fruits or vegetables tonight when you get home. You're probably not going to sleep well, and then you won't be very happy tomorrow, right? Start tomorrow if you haven't had any veggies yet or fruit today, right? So we got to be temperate in all the things that we do, right? But check out this study. This is from the British Journal of Nutrition. This is the Dietary Phytochemical Index. That word phyto, P-H-Y-T-O, that word phyto means plant. Plant. So when you see phytonutrient, that means plant nutrients. Nutrients that come from plants. And they said that people who ate the most unrefined plant foods, now not just plant foods, because sugar is a plant food. You know, pure sugar. You eat a pound of sugar. That's a plant food. But that's a refined plant food, and it's junk food, right? We're not talking about that. We're talking about unrefined plant foods. People who ate the most unrefined plant foods had 78% lower depression, 67% lower anxiety, and 70% lower psychological distress. Isn't that powerful? So we want to get largely to eating more and more unrefined plant foods. Well, that is if we want to be happier. But notice what they found. Those who had the lowest levels of depression, anxiety, and psychological distress ate the most fruit, vegetables, whole grains, legumes like beans, nuts, zinc, potassium, magnesium, vitamin C, vitamin E, vitamin A, fiber, and carbs. You say, what? The happiest people ate the most carbs? Yes. The happiest people eat the most carbs. That's the way it generally works. And it's even amongst Seventh-day Adventists. Because did you know amongst the Seventh-day Adventists, who are the happiest people? It is actually the Adventists. The research has shown, I'm not just telling you this, the research, they've already done the research, the Adventists who stick closer to what we're suggested in our diet and are on the plant-based diet are the happiest Adventists. Isn't that interesting? And they also eat more carbs. But when most people think of carbs, they're thinking of like Butterfingers, they're thinking like Twinkies, and typically Adventists who are in the health message don't eat junk food as much. I'm not saying nobody. I'm not saying there are plenty of Adventists who eat junk food, but meaning typically the ones who are trying to go wholly plant-based, and I don't mean H-O-L-Y, but they're trying to go completely plant-based, they actually are happier people. That's what the research shows. And remember, all of God's commandments were for our good and our happiness. She actually says, Ellen White actually says that too. So both of you are right. Now, let's look at one of the sweetest fruits. It's the sweetest fruit I know of. Anybody got a guess the sweetest fruit you can think of? Yeah. Plums are wonderful. I just had 2 for breakfast. It's not plums, yes. Ripe bananas, they're quite sweet. He nailed it. Dates. Let's look at research on dates. Now, dates are 80% sugar. Frosting on a cake is like 60 or 70% sugar. So you might be thinking, so Chad, you're saying we should eat more frosting on cakes than dates, right? Well, we're going to look at the research. Before we even look at the research, who made dates? Who made frosting on a cake? You're thinking, what, the devil? No, I'm not saying that. But now let's look at the research here. A randomized controlled trial was reported in the journal Nutrients on dates, and 3 dates were consumed by one group daily for a total of 6 weeks, and those who consumed 3 dates a day had a statistically significant lowering of their total and LDL cholesterol. They also had an increase in quality of life and an enhancement of mental health. Meaning they evidently were happier or at least less stressed, something along those lines, when they began to consume dates. So you might be thinking, okay, well, that's 3 dates a day. Well, how many can you have? So they did a study where they had people eat like 3 or so dates a day, and it didn't negatively impact their blood sugar levels, their glucose levels. So they did a study with they did one study with 7 to 10 dates a day. And that's quite a few dates, isn't it? 10 dates. And they had both people who didn't have diabetes, and then they had a group who did have diabetes, and they did 7 to 10 dates a day. And for those who did not have diabetes, it did not negatively affect their blood sugar levels. And for those who did have diabetes, it did not negatively affect their blood sugar levels. And yet it's 80% sugar. It's a high fiber food, and it is in what's called the fiber lattice. The fiber in the plant holds onto the sugar, and what it does is it gives you a slow release of the glucose so that it gives you good, healthy energy, but does not spike your blood sugar. Does that make sense? Isn't that exciting? So should we be afraid of dates, yes or no? No, we should actually seek them out in general, right? Now, once again, the interesting thing about plant foods is some random plant food, you might struggle with, if you're a diabetic and you check your blood sugar. Now, when you first do it, it might actually spike your blood sugar because you're just not used to it, but your body will typically actually become more sensitive to insulin as you eat more fruit. Right away, you might have a blood sugar spike the first day or two, but within days, your blood sugar actually should start coming down because your body becomes more sensitive to insulin, and the body just uptakes the glucose better. But you'll have to test it out for yourself, but that generally is the case. So don't be afraid of fruit. You know what Ellen White tells us about dried fruit? And I could show you the research. I didn't put it in here, and I don't want to go off on that, but Ellen White says you can eat more dried fruit than is customary with best results to health. And you know what? That is exactly what the research shows. If you haven't seen So my YouTube channel, if you don't know, is called Health and Homestead. And I have a video on the scientific research on dried fruit. And it is incredible the benefits that it has for you. And so don't be so afraid of that. She says you can eat more than is customary with the best results to health. Almost nobody says it and almost nobody believes it. Actually, they teach the opposite. Be careful with dried fruit, they say. But I haven't found the research to back that up. Just people's opinions. And yeah, I don't take a lot of stock in opinions. But nevertheless, so let's look at morning larks versus night owls. Morning larks versus night owls. Research reported in the journal Emotion looked into happiness and sleep time. They also looked at sleep time, emotion, and age. And what did they find? Less young people are prone to be morning larks, and these are people that have who get up early and mostly go to bed early. As people increase to the age of 60, they are more prone to changing their sleep time to earlier and becoming larks. And the reason I say this is because some of you might think, well, I'm just a morning person, or I'm just a night owl, and that's just who I am. I used to think of myself as a night owl. I used to go to bed at 2, 3 in the morning, all throughout high school. And you know what? It was horrible. Then I became an Adventist. I went to a school, and my roommate went to bed at 9:30 every night, 9 to 9:30. And so I did the same. He got up every day at 5, had devotions for 3 hours. So you know what I did? Got up every morning and had devotions for 3 hours every day. I'm so glad he was my roommate. Changed my life, right? And my mental health became so much better. My energy became so much better. And I have learned to actually like to go to bed earlier. You can change too. You are not created to be a night owl. You're not. Simple as that. God can change you. But let's go into some research on this. But they found that whether people are old or young, those who are morning larks are happier. Going to bed early, waking up early. We're going to look at research. This is incredible. So this is insane. People who are definitively evening people compared with those who are morning people have a 94% higher chance of having a psychological disorder. 94. Almost no health habits are like 94% higher chance of some problem. I don't know of almost anything else there is that can increase your rates of disease or mental health problems. Like, I don't know any, okay, heroin. If you're doing heroin, like if you're doing methamphetamine, yeah, that's going to like, almost guaranteed you're going to struggle with depression. But when it comes to like normal health habits, look at it. People who definitively are evening people compared to those who are morning people have a 94% higher chance of having a psychological disorder. This is an unbelievable statistic. Some of that go along with what happens at night? To a degree, yes. But even if you're just reading or watching television, yeah, you could probably watch junk all night too. And that is probably part of it, but I think it's actually more the timing of going to bed than anything. Some people do work late. And if you really struggle with depression, do the best you can at some point to make the transition, if you can. Sometimes you can't, and you just have to live with it, but if you can. Research looking at over 700,000 people found that for every 1 hour earlier rising time, you reduce your risk of depression by 23%. So that means if you're, used to waking up at 8 o'clock and then you wake up at 7 o'clock, you reduce your risk of depression by 23%. Then if you go to 6, you double it to 46%. And if you make it 5, you get the idea. What is it, 69% or something like that at that point? You get the idea. And yeah, I met a man whose wife died. He took care of her, lovingly took care of him. When he told the story, he would cry, and so you knew he loved her. She had MS, I believe, and she was incapacitated. She could talk and so forth, but she ended up dying. And I was there a couple months later, and I asked him, have you been struggling with depression? And he said, I miss her, but no, I'm not actually struggling with depression. He's spiritual, number one, but number two, brother man goes to bed at like 8 o'clock every night and wakes up like 4 in the morning every day. So you add it up, like you go from 69% to like 80, 90, I mean, you're almost 100% chance of not being depressed at that point if you're getting up at 4 and go to bed at early. And the guy lost his wife who he dearly loved, and yet he wasn't depressed a couple months later. God has given us simple principles, and you are the arbiter of your own destiny. You get to choose what happens in your life. So timing and duration of sleep on mental health. Research in the journal Cognitive Therapy and Research revealed that sleep time and duration affect what's called RNT, or repetitive negative thinking. You ever have that? Thoughts going over and over and over that you wish you wouldn't think about them, but you can't stop. Well, what did they find in this particular study? It turns out that shorter sleep duration is correlated with more negative thoughts and obsessive compulsive symptoms. If you're not sleeping well, that might be why you might be struggling with OCD-like symptoms, going over and over and over the same things. And sleep deprivation and depression, a study starting with over 4,000 young people ranging in age from 11 to 17, concluding a year later with over 3,000 of the same young people, revealed that those who slept less than or equal to 6 hours a night had higher chances of either having or acquiring depression. So sleep is so very important. Going to bed early, waking up early, both of these things are very important. And, you know, if God knew this, maybe he should have just told us about it. He did, right? What do we see? It says, wake up in the mornings, set your hour to rise early, and bring yourself to it. Then retire at an early hour. And you will see that you will overcome many painful disorders which distress the mind, cause gloomy feelings, discouragement, and unhappy friction, and disqualify you for doing anything without great taxation. Did she nail what the research showed, yes or no? Isn't it interesting that basically everything I show you, we were just told this long ago. We didn't. Now, I show you the studies because it's come out in the peer-reviewed literature that, oh, by the way, the little old lady with a third-grade education happened to be right, dead on all of these things. But yet, those Adventists who didn't do it based on science but did it based on faith became some of the healthiest and happiest people in the world. I'm showing you the research because I know sometimes even our physicians don't believe it because they weren't taught a lot of this stuff in college and so forth or in their med school. And so I share it so that the research is out there and you can go look it up for yourself. You can go see it in the scientific journals for yourself. But she was right. And so many of our problems can be dealt with by simple, simple things. Now, this is, I'm not going to show it to you and I don't have the audio for it here anyway, but basically this is, I did a video. You can watch it on our YouTube channel. It's on mercury and the research on mercury. There's study after study has come out on mercury. People used to think, that's just old wives' tales and whatever, but I will actually go to the peer-reviewed literature like International Journal of something Public Health, and it's rethinking the dental amalgam dilemma and integrated toxicological approach, and mercury has been identified as one of the most toxic, non-radioactive materials known to man. And so, yeah, I won't show you the whole video, but you can go watch the video on my channel. Basically, mercury is one of the most potent neurotoxins we know of. It's one of the most potent neurotoxins. And the American Dental Association told us that, okay, we know that it's one of the most toxic metals that is known. It's one of the most potent neurotoxins, but it is safe to put it in your mouth. Does that sound reasonable? The spirit of prophecy told us that if you have one particle of this in your body, it has its health-destroying effects. She told us that. And then we were told, yeah, but the medical system tells us it's perfectly fine. Yeah, it's totally dangerous, except for in your mouth. Do you want to normally put toxic things in your mouth all the time? And the fascinating thing is, it is continually, 24 hours a day, giving off mercury vapor. You can actually watch videos where they can actually put it in a light, and you can see it looks like it's evaporating 24 hours. You can actually see the evaporation with the right lighting, 100% of the time. It just evaporates. And most of that, like 80% of that, goes into your bloodstream. Yes? You're exactly right. And if you watch, I don't have television, but I go over to people's house, and I sit there as they're watching the news, and if you watch the news channels, there's two main kind of commercials you typically see. Advertisements for drugs, and advertisements for lawyers telling you you could get money because you used to take one of the drugs. Yes or no? Am I telling the truth? But we're sure that the new drugs don't have those side effects. But wait 2-3 years, and those drugs, many of them will be on the commercials, and the lawyers will be saying, you may be entitled to a settlement because you used to take, drug D or whatever. Yes? And that actually potentially can be the case. That can be the case. And if you do choose to remove them, number one, it's terribly expensive, and number two, I would suggest that you go to a dentist who specializes in it. Because, yeah, it can be. I have a friend who's a dentist who actually, he didn't realize, he started to lose his mind. He started to become psychotic. Sounds like an insult, but he owned 2 dental practices, and his mind he started going crazy. He had to sell both of his dental practices, and he didn't know what was wrong. Somebody suggests he goes, there's an Adventist doctor in the state of Washington named Dr. John Mundell who does testing for mercury toxicity. So he did probably urine testing. I don't know if there's a blood test, but there's hair test also, and the guy was just straight up toxic with mercury. Because, he's drilling in old, I don't think he actually did mercury fillings, because a lot of dentists don't do that anymore. But he would have to drill old ones, because you sometimes have to replace, amalgam fillings. And so he'd drill them. And so as he's drilling, all that air, I mean, not every bit of it, but a bunch of it is coming up into him. And so he is literally toxic from mercury. He finds out that he's toxic. He goes on what's called chelation therapy, where you take a substance that basically grabs hold of it and helps you excrete it through your urine. And so you take that out of the body. Well, his mind came back. He was able to go back. He's now in dentistry again. At some point, his daughter ended up coming down with the same psychological problems. They had his daughter tested, and she was mercury toxic. Evidently, he was bringing so much mercury home in his clothing that he was infecting his family. That's not the right word, but he was, causing toxicity to his own family as a result of it. And so you can see more of the research on our channel called Health and Homestead if you want to see the actual data talking about that. I just say that to say simply, some people find a great benefit. I don't want to even, sometimes I don't even say that because I'm just like, it's so much money, I don't want people to, but it's like, if nothing else has worked in your life and you're struggling with serious psychological disorders, that might be the problem if you have a mouthful of mercury. But then it's expensive to get rid of it. I'm not telling you what to do, it is just good to know, and the Spirit of Prophecy told us this. Now, I wasn't raised in this faith, but I could have been saved from a mouthful of mercury, which I used to have, because if I would have known from the Spirit of Prophecy, I wouldn't have listened to the popular ideas of science, because she always ends up being right. Now, a few years ago, somebody would have looked at her and said, oh, she's full of it, she's wrong, she was wrong about this. It's safe to put it in your mouth. Until the latter data came out and says, no, clearly. This causes problems to infants, all kinds of problems when the mother has it in her mouth. And so, yeah, you can watch the research on that. But some positive research here. That was kind of negative. But listening to nature, birds and happiness. Researchers at King's College London found that seeing or listening to birds could enhance an individual's well-being for up to 8 hours. Isn't that neat? So think about it. Wouldn't it be a good idea then to go out and spend time outside? Especially because we're already at the point of year where, like, I know it's not summer yet, but the birds are starting to come back. They're actually coming back already a little bit in February. And so you may start hearing the birds outside. That can make you happier. But keep that in mind. Keep that study in your mind. University of Sussex, participants were to listen to either natural environments or artificial environments. The natural environmental sounds included wind in the trees. Another environmental sound was a babbling brook. And they did MRI scans on these people, And during the natural sounds of like the wind in the trees or the babbling brook, the brain had an outward focus. Outward focus. In contrast to those who were listening, I don't know, maybe the city sounds of, maybe cityscapes or those kind of things. During the artificial sounds, the brain had an inward focus, similar to what is seen in people with depression, anxiety, and PTSD. I couldn't even find in this particular study, no, not artificial nature sounds. I'm guessing it's cityscapes, but I don't know for sure, because some studies, they don't let you read far enough to find out. And so, but I think it had to do with cityscapes, like the sound of a city, like the artificial sound of a city. Yeah, cars, horns, just the, rumble of a city. But I'm not 100% sure, but those who at the beginning of the study who had the highest levels of stress had the most significant drop in their stress during the nature sounds. Now, thinking about this, did God know this? And if he did, maybe he could have just told us, right? Listen to this. 2 Testimonies 5:30. To walk out after a meal, hold the head erect, put back the shoulders, and exercise moderately will be a great benefit. The mind will be diverted from what? Self to the beauties of, isn't that exactly what the research showed? Exactly. And then, listen to this one. It says, a sweet sense of restfulness and refreshing comes over them as they listen to the murmuring breezes. Is that what the study showed? It was specifically the sound of the leaves blowing in the trees. And she says, a sweet sense of restfulness and refreshing comes over them as they listen to the murmuring breezes. And then she tells us what physiologically happens in the body. The drooping spirits revive, the waning strength is recruited, unconsciously the mind becomes peaceful, the fevered pulse more calm and regular. She tells us by listening to these sounds of the breezes, it actually brings peace, it lowers your pulse rate, it physiologically changes you for the better. How beautiful. God has given nature for our mental health. Nature, anxiety, and depression. A study was conducted to see if time in nature would benefit major depressive disorder. 12 individuals that had major depressive disorder and at the outset were tested in regard to their short-term memory. They then were asked to think back on a problematic, unresolved issue in their life. And they then went on 2 separate occasions, 1 week apart, on a 50-minute walk in nature or a 50-minute walk in the city. The result was that the participants had a substantial increase in memory span after the nature walk compared to the city walk. So the same amount of exercise in the city didn't have the same benefit, and mood scores were also better after the nature walk. God has given us nature. And the great thing for many of you who live in this area, you got like the Heartland Trail like kind of running through the whole area, right? And many of you don't even need that. You can just walk down your dirt road and go for a walk, right? We went on a walk this afternoon. And you can get out there, and this can, in and of itself, increase your happiness. Now, here's a study on something called the subgenual prefrontal cortex. This little red area is the subgenual prefrontal cortex. And here's research on nature versus urban walking, city walking, and its effect on what's called rumination, repetitive negative thinking. It has been shown that rumination is a risk factor for mental illness, and a study was reported in the Proceedings for the National Academy of Sciences in the USA, and they had healthy individuals walk for 90 minutes in either an urban setting in the city or a natural environment. And what did they find? That those who walked for 90 minutes in a natural setting had a decrease of activity in the subgenual prefrontal cortex, the area of the brain, and lower levels of rumination. The area of the brain where you go over and over and over the negative thinking. They found that going for a walk in nature specifically helped calm down those negative, repetitive thoughts. And the same benefit was not seen in those who had an urban walk. Now, this doesn't mean if you live in the city, don't ever go for a walk. It just may not have the same levels of stress-lowering benefit. It may not have as much of mental health benefit, but it's still beneficial for your body. So if you live in the city and that's your only option, it's still better than nothing. But if you can get out in nature, how much better? So, think of each health habit that we've just talked about as a weight on your back. So imagine if you don't drink 6 glasses of water a day, it's like adding a 20-pound weight in your backpack. Well, you could still get around with a 20-pound weight on your back, right? Sure you could. But then let's say you don't exercise. And you don't exercise, so that's like adding another 20 pounds. Now you got 40 pounds in your backpack. Now, most of you could still walk around all right. It wouldn't be as nice, but you could still get around. And then you don't go out in nature, so it's like adding another 20 pounds. Now you're like 60 pounds. Now it's getting hard to walk. You might be able to still do it, but it's getting harder and harder and harder. And let's say, you struggle with sleep. We saw the one study that showed that those who go to bed late have a 94% higher chance of having a psychological disorder. So that's more like adding, I wouldn't say 20 pounds, I would say at least 40 pounds or more. And you see what happens is the more health habits that you don't do, the heavier your backpack gets. The heavier the burden is on your back, and the harder it is to get through life. But if then all of a sudden you're like, man, I'm not doing these things, and so maybe some of you have 200 pounds on your back. And so finally you're like, you know what, I got to start somewhere. I guess I could drink 6 glasses of water. And so you drink 6 glasses. Well, if you got 200 pounds and you lose 20 pounds off your back, you're probably not going to notice a major change, right? Might not even be enough to even notice. But then if you start going to bed earlier, now you dropped with the water, you got like 60 pounds, and you're like, whoa, still hard to walk, but man, it's a bit easier, And then all of a sudden you get out in the sun, or if you can't get out in the sun because you live in Michigan, you get the light box or whatever, you're taking another 20 pounds off, and you see what happens. And the more you choose to implement these things in your life, the lighter and lighter life gets. And then you all of a sudden get to the point where you got pep in your step, and now it's not even not hard to run. You even are not hard to walk. Now you can even go for a run, right? Because life is so much lighter. You're feeling so much better. And some of you might think, nah, those things are just too simple. I need something bigger than those simplistic health habits. Come on now. Eating some dates, that's not going to do any good. Well, here's the thing. What if the 3 dates didn't make that big a difference, but they tasted good? That's still a benefit, right? The point is, you get a benefit out of these things. You get a benefit out of it. Eating more fruits and vegetables. We saw that those who eat 7 or 8 servings of fruits or vegetables, just happier each one. Each one you add to your happiness. So how many fruits or vegetables are you eating? And unrefined, right? Cutting out soda. 100% out of your diet. You don't need soda. That's a waste of money. It's a waste of life, and it makes you more depressed. Can you think of something worse than paying to be depressed? Yeah. Get rid of the stuff. It's not helping you. It's causing problems. And by the way, diet soda is beneficial at increasing potentially rates of diabetes. Diet soda. You say, Chad, but it doesn't have any sugar in it. But yet it increases potentially weight and diabetes. How is that possible? Who knows what those chemicals are doing to your body, right? Cut it out of your diet. Just get rid of it altogether. I'm not telling you what you have to do, but I kind of am, because it's worthless. You don't need it. And so I can just say to you, just stop drinking that stuff. You'll save yourself money, and you'll be happier. Learn to drink water. You say, I don't like water. Okay, drop a little, lemon juice or lime in there. But in time, you can learn to change your taste buds. You have autonomy. You have a choice to change. A friend of mine was 100 pounds overweight. And this preacher, he was a brother from our church, and he would preach on health, and he preached fiery, not like me. I'm not a fiery preacher, but this preacher, he got up and he said to the people, he said on the sermon, he said, listen, you all know this stuff. You know every bit of this stuff. He said, when are you going to do it? And my friend, who was 100 pounds overweight, and he's like, he's right. I know everything he just said. When am I going to do it? He's like, I'm going to do it today. And sometimes we need that, shake you out of it, right? Like that, the old proverbial, I'm sick of this and I'm not going to take it anymore, right? You have autonomy. If you're struggling with these issues, today's the day to make a decision. You know all this stuff. It's pretty simple. I didn't tell you anything revolutionary today, did I? But it's still kind of exciting, isn't it? Because all of this could make a big difference. And since I've implemented these things in my life, like I don't really take the herbs or anything like that, but as far as just, the general health habits have changed my life. And so I want to challenge you. I'm not sure why it sounded so funny, but if there's something in your life that you're not doing or that you need to start doing, I want to challenge you to give it a try. How many of you, and this isn't like a rebuke, how many of you see at least one thing in this list that we've just gone through that you're like, yeah, I should probably start doing that? Anybody think, yeah, that's a good idea? And this isn't a rebuke. So you raise your hand, and I want to challenge you. You are the arbiter of your own destiny. Today is the first day of your new future life. Even if it's one or two, and some of you it might be 10 of the things. But I would challenge you to begin to implement it. And I'm going to go back. I want to the Bible says in I don't know why. It sounds kind of funny now, doesn't it? Is that what it is? Okay, maybe the battery. Testing. Good. Praise the Lord. Just about done, guys. And what I'm going to do is, at the end, I'm going to put up that whole list so you can look at the list, take a picture of it with your phone or whatever. These aren't the only things, but they're just some of the simple things you could do, and they could literally change your life. But I want to finish with, the Bible says in Jeremiah 17, verse 14, "Heal me, O Lord, and I shall be healed. Save me, and I shall be saved, for thou art my praise." Part of the healing when it comes to mental health is actually doing what God asks us to do. Not to be saved, but it could save you from depression. It may not save you eternally. It won't. You don't get to, exercise doesn't get you to go to heaven. Eating right doesn't get you to go to heaven. But it might save you from depression. It might save you from family problems. It might, when you're depressed, it's hard to be happy in the home. It's hard to be kind to your wife or your husband or your children. So it could save your family. And so whatever it would take, right? Heal me, O Lord, and I shall be healed. Save me, and I shall be saved, for thou art my praise. Jesus went through, he knows what it's like to be depressed. Ellen might even use that term about him. That he went through, she says at one point, the depression left him, and he went forward. And when Jesus was on the cross, he quoted Psalms 22, verse 1, where he said, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" Now, when he said that, it was his experience there, but it was also like if I got up in front of you and said, "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound," what comes next? That saved a wretch like me. You know exactly what I'm doing. You know I'm quoting a song. The Jews, who probably had the whole book of Psalms memorized, when they heard, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" immediately their mind should have thought Psalm 22. Yes or no? They knew it. So they would have known. What he's saying is, yes, this is his experience, but notice this is like what Jesus was going through was what was taking place in Psalms 22. Where he says, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Why art thou so far from helping me, and from the words of my roaring? Oh my God, I cry in the daytime, but thou hearest not, and in the night season, and am not silent. Have you ever felt like that? You're coming to God hoping he will save you, and you're just, God, it seems like he's not listening. Jesus felt like that. He knows what it's like to feel like you. But then notice the change. I believe that Psalms 22 is not just the first words or part of his experience. I believe it's actually a depiction of his experience on the cross. And it goes on to say in verse 3, he changes what he's saying to "but." So notice the first part is like, Lord, I feel like you're not with me. I feel like you've rejected me. I feel like you're not hearing my prayer. Why have you forsaken me? But then he changes to, but thou art holy. O thou that inhabitest the praises of Israel. Now he turns his eyes to, but God, I know you're holy, even though I don't feel your love right now. I don't feel that you love me, but I know you're holy. And then he goes on to say in verse 4 and 5,
Our fathers trusted in thee. They trusted, and thou deliverest them. Or you did deliver them. They cried unto thee and were delivered. They trusted in thee and were not confounded. To me, I think Jesus was even trying to almost claim promises while he was on the cross. His mind turns from God, why have you forsaken me, to I know you're holy, Father, to Father, you even were loving to those rebellious Jews in the wilderness. You took care of them even though they fully didn't deserve it, hoping, I believe, that maybe you could save me. But we know that we're told he could not see through the portals of the tomb. But here he is trying to trust in his Father when it seems like all hope is lost. I went through 11 years, as I said, of depression where I was preaching the gospel to people. I was preaching righteousness by faith. But in my own heart, I could not feel it, that I was saved. I felt lost for those years. I shared the gospel with people. People gave their life to Jesus as a result of the ministry that I did. Many people were baptized into the church. But you know what? I didn't feel saved, but I even thought, what if I'm lost? But at least other people could be saved by my ministry. And so I kept sharing the gospel. I had devotions every single day. I sought Jesus. I was seeking to be right with God. I tried spending thousands of dollars to try to right the wrongs of my past, never feeling any peace. I felt as if God was not, like Jesus was saying, why have you forsaken me? But I'm so thankful I never gave up. Because finally, and if you've heard my seminar on the gut-brain connection, it was actually I had gut issues, and when my gut healed, my depression went away. When the depression went away, I didn't look back on it and think, yeah, I was lost for those 11 years. I believed I was actually in a saving relationship with Jesus. I just couldn't feel it. But you are not saved. The Bible doesn't say, for by feelings are you saved. It says, by grace are you saved through faith. Faith is not feeling. Whether you feel saved or unsaved, that doesn't prove whether you're saved or not saved. Now, if you're living in sin and turning against God and you feel unsaved, well, you should feel unsaved. But if you're seeking with all your heart to know Jesus, you can know today if you're walking with Jesus. We're told that. She tells us that. You don't have to live in guilt and shame all the time. You can put away your sins and you can have peace in your soul. But even if you don't have the peace like I did not for 11 years because I had a physiological problem with my gut, don't give up. I'm so glad I never gave up, that I kept going forward and kept seeking the answer. And the good news is, there'll come a day where there's no more pain, nor sorrow, nor death. So if you feel like giving up, remember what Doug Batchelor said to his mother. His mother called him up, saying, I think she said, I'm contemplating committing suicide. And Doug wisely said to her, I've thought of doing it too. But then I thought about it, and I thought, sometimes in life you try some new thing out. Some things you like, some things you don't. He said, I thought about it. What if I killed myself and then I didn't like it? He said, the trouble is I can't go back and fix the problem. And she said to him, in her state of wanting to kill herself, she said, you know what? That is a good point. I'm not going to kill myself. You may have heard that they did a survey of as many people. The number one place to kill yourself in America is? A certain place. Golden Gate Bridge. Number one place to kill yourself. And typically what happens is so high that people jump, and when they hit the water, the impact is so hard, they typically break their back or break some bones, and then the water's very cold, but now you just broke your back so you can't swim very well, or maybe at all. Maybe you're paralyzed. And then that's a rough way to go, right? But several of them have lived, and many of them with lifelong debilitating health problems because of it. And they interviewed as many of them as they could find, and they asked them all the same question. They said, did you regret jumping? And every single one of them said, yes. They asked them a follow-up question. They said, when did you regret jumping? And you know what the response was? They said, the second I jumped. So the moment they jumped, immediately they thought, oh no, made the wrong decision. If you ever feel like committing suicide, which I would have never committed suicide. That was not even an option. I wasn't planning on it, nor did I want to. But the point is, if you're so depressed that you feel like doing it, always remember you would regret it if you did do it. And no, you wouldn't like it. And so trust. Do not give up even if you're down. Jesus still loves you, even if you don't sense it. So friends, if you've seen some of the habits, and I'm going to, let's close with a prayer. I'll show you a couple quick things, and then we'll go. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this night. Thank you for your love. Thank you for our blessed Savior, Jesus. Thank you that he knows what it's like to feel lost, to feel depressed. He is our example in everything. But yet he pressed forward, and we're all saved today because he didn't give up. And Father, if we feel like giving up, help us to cling to you, because if we do cling to you, others will be saved through our example. Help us to become like Jesus, to be overcomers through him. And Lord, if there's some of these health habits that we need to implement in our lives, help us to do that and to draw nearer to you in the name of Jesus. Amen. I want to show you just a couple of quick clips before we go, and let me show you this very quickly.
I've been diagnosed as a diabetic for a little over 20 years. And because of my family background, all four grandparents were diabetic. Mom and dad were diabetic. My brother, who passed away a few years ago of diabetic complications, is diabetic. And so with that history, I would be extreme chance for being dead by the age of 40. My side effects were mostly neuropathies. A neuropathy is a feeling you get. It's comes from within the nerve system, deteriorating due to the blood sugar situation. And mine was numbness in my feet. My feet, half of both feet were always numb, and sometimes even back as far as my heel coming up toward my ankle on some days, but always half a foot. At night, periodically, the rubbing of my feet on the sheets would feel like they were being rubbed on a red-hot iron, just like they were being blistered. I'd have to put my feet out from under the covers and over the edge of the bed so they weren't touching anything. But the numbness never went away, day or night. I started this therapeutic diet idea before I knew it was therapeutic diet, about a week or maybe two before I met Chad and was introduced to the therapeutic diet concept. I had started adding more fruit, fresh fruit, and more fresh vegetables to an already vegetarian diet. But I was lacto-ovo. That's milk and eggs and cheese vegetarian. We went to the brain-gut connection and got a hold of the recipe book and started some real changes. And within 3 days, the numbness was progressing out of my feet. Within a week, I was down to where I just had 2 toes on each foot that were numb 24/7. And then a few more days, that went to where I could have feeling on the tops of all my feet, all my toes, all my foot. Another day went by, it was down to 1 toe next to the big one. The second toe on both feet were the only numbs. Then that went down to where it was down to just 1 toe, and now the numbness has gone out of all toes and feet. I have a little bit of residual, kind of a fluffy, fuzzy feeling in the left second toe. But basically, I could say it's 99.9% gone. So that's gone. The other thing that I noticed that showed up, I didn't even think about it at the time, but I had been unable to work more than 5-10 minutes out in the yard, and then I'd have to come in and rest for half an hour. And the other day, I was out pruning shrubs and carrying the debris out of the yard and putting it into the pickup. And I was out there for a little over 3 hours, and I came in feeling better than when I went out. So the energy factor is something that kind of surprised me. I didn't expect. So, you know. So it's been an amazing 2.5, 3 week trip. If it keeps like this, look out, boy. Yeah, the world's gonna know I'm here.
He was 80 years old that when we recorded him. It was 2.5 weeks into it. Like he said, 99% better with his neuropathy in his feet. He started with a cane. He started depressed. 2.5 weeks into it, no more cane walk. He came in slowly hunched over the first days. He came in with pep in his step at the end. He was a changed man in 2.5 weeks. It was so powerful.
According to an article in the National Institute of Health, the book of Daniel in the Bible reveals the first clinical trial in all of recorded history. What is interesting about this clinical trial, which was conducted 2,500 years ago, is that it is a study of the gut-brain connection. Inspiration revealed long before modern science the staggering fact that that which affects the gut will ultimately affect the brain as well. Is it possible that the majority of mental problems may actually stem from the gut? Is it possible to overcome depression, anxiety, bouts of anger, and social anxiety by changing the way you eat? One of the greatest reasons people are not able to find victory in the area of overeating and eating unhealthy food is because they are taken captive by the negative aspects of the gut-brain connection. Instead of being captive to these negative aspects, you can actually use it to your advantage to help you overcome in various areas of your life. In every gut, there are good bacteria and bad bacteria. If you have too many bad bacteria, it can tip the scales into inflammation, joint pain, and even depression. If you have more good bacteria, it can benefit your happiness. How do you increase the good bacteria? Are there certain quantities of good food proven to increase a sense of well-being? In this 6-part lecture seminar with nearly 6 hours of information, you will learn what foods can be eaten that make you comfortably full and yet still lose excess pounds, all the while feeling great. You will also learn additional information on the diet of the longest living people in the world. Natural remedies are either loved or laughed at. Conventional medication is trusted by most almost implicitly, but it turns out that different antibiotics, which are considered the greatest form of drug in history, are associated with 41% increased rates of Parkinson's disease, 40% increased risk of gastric cancer, 40% greater risk of lung cancer, 60% higher risk of rheumatoid arthritis, 23 to 56% greater risk of depression, and they are also associated with a higher risk of our #1 killer, heart disease. Are there other options? In this lecture series, we will look at many natural remedies, including herbs that have been tested head-to-head in scientific journals against some of the standard pharmaceutical medications. And we will discover that many natural remedies have been shown in evidence-based research to be just as good or better than many standard medications, in many cases with significantly lower side effects. We begin the series looking at some of the history of natural remedies from Egypt through Rome, all the way down to Native Americans. Session 2 delves into how to live a healthy life so that on the whole you do not have to use remedies. Then from session 3, 4, 5, and 6, we delve into study after study and find remedies for maladies ranging from migraines to PMS symptoms, how to change lifestyle to potentially reverse ED, and cholesterol, blood pressure, and blood sugar lowering remedies, a remedy for irritable bowel syndrome, in addition to remedies for depression and anxiety. We will look at a simple herb that helps as a sleep aid and many more. So come along on a tour of history and research and learn more at anchorpointfilms.com.
So that's it. We will have some of the DVDs. If anybody has any interest in checking them out, I'll have them just outside. It'll take me a couple minutes to do that. But thank you so much for coming. Had a great time with you all. God bless and have a great night.